It's our first two questions. Am I set apart to him, or am I starting to separate myself from him? Okay? So, what it comes down to, we find this word in vayabo that means and came, and that's what this means. Vayabo means and came. We have to stop and check ourselves. We can be convinced, and this is something that I really want us to grab onto. We can be convinced without a doubt that we are walking step by step with Yahweh Elohim, not realizing that we are way off course and that we're actually walking alone. Okay? Everybody get that?
Yeah. That's good.
We can think that we're walking side by side with Elohim. You know, we're all doing great. But in reality, we strayed off. And we don't realize it. Remember the serpent. Why did the Satan use the serpent? Because it was the most subtle. Okay? We have to take time to check our map regularly and adjust our course. Am I judging? Am I whining about my situation? Have I spoken curses into my life? How do we speak curses into our life?
By speaking it.
Speak negatives into our life. What we bind on earth is bound where? In the realm of Elohim. If I say, I'm sick, then Elohim says, okay, you're going to be sick. Be sick. Then you realize it. Oh, I break that curse in the name of Yahshua. I break that curse in the name of your redemption, your deliverance from this illness that I spoke into my life, and your restoration that comes only in your name. Have I spoken these things into my life? We have to be sure that we are in the house of Elohim and trusting in his provision, his protection, his nourishment, and finding our rest in him. Yahshua paid for this type of relationship. It is our responsibility to keep the course in the covenant. Yahshua said, blessed are those who are poor, for theirs is the realm of Elohim. This is a very important thing, that we must be aware of our spiritual state. If we are in a state of spiritual poverty, then we are blessed because we recognize that we are in a state of spiritual poverty. I've strayed off course. Now I make teshuvah. I turn around and I get back where I should be. Our next word to consider is lisefad, that means to mourn. Okay? This word means exactly what it says. It literally means to mourn. It means to lament. So when we become aware that we have strayed off the path and that we are spiritually poor, then the first step is to step towards teshuvah. We have this word, it's lisefad. It begins with the letter lamed, that grammatically, in this particular case, means to or in the direction of. So if we say that lamed as a letter represents instruction, the word lamed is one of the Hebrew words for instruction, then what are we saying? What then can comfort us when we have discovered that we are not walking Elohim? That we must seek the instruction of Yahweh Elohim. We must enter into his word. We need to start going in the direction of his instruction instead of straying off the path. Okay? Yahshua said to come to him and find rest in his heart. And this is the Torah of Yahweh Elohim. Yahshua said that those who mourn will be comforted. And it is by yoking ourselves to the word that we find comfort. We must recognize that we are at the farthest point from the Aleph. In other words, we are at the farthest point from the presence of Elohim. When we realize this, then we can turn around and make our way back. Because when we stray, we find ourselves there at the Tav. The Tav is the last letter of the Aleph Beit. It's the farthest point from the Aleph. We say Yahshua had to go to the Tav. He had to become, Tav means what? Vehicle of sacrifice. He had to become the vehicle of sacrifice. And the letter Tav also means the covenant marker in order to restore a covenant. Well, what covenant did he restore? He didn't restore the covenant at Sinai. Because if he did, then we'd all be in trouble because we'd be right back in the Levitical system and most of us would be dead because we'd have been stoned for something. The covenant that he restored that we lose sight of is the covenant that Elohim had with Adam in the garden. The very first covenant. Where he said, take care of my garden. You take care of my garden, I will protect you. That's what Garden of Eden means. It means hedge of protection. Eden means delight, that we are his delight in the garden. So, this is the Tav that has a numerical value of 400. And if we will note in our Parsha, Abraham paid 400 pieces of silver to bury his dead. Silver represents redemption. The Tav, as we've said, is a letter that represents the vehicle of sacrifice as well as the mark of the covenant. And in this we understand that Yahshua was the vehicle of sacrifice that paid the price at the burial plot for us to bury those dead things that corrupt our lives, and he paid for us to be able to receive redemption, deliverance from these dead things, as well as restoration, and be restored to a covenant, walking side by side with Yahweh Elohim, just like we did in the breeze of the day in the garden. Okay? The choice is ours. It's always got to find its way in there. The choice is ours. We can accept it or not. The choice is always going to be ours. So where were we? The final word that we're going to consider in this word is the word for and to weep for. And to weep for her, which is veli vech ota. And this is really a neat word. If we'll notice in this word, and this word comes straight out of your Torah. In fact, if you want to go, verse 2, chapter 23, you're going to notice that this kaf in your Torah is actually bold-faced and it's smaller than the other ones. It's something that's hidden in there. But in Torah, the kaf is bold, but it alerts us right away to a blessing, that there is a blessing involved in this word. Okay? This type of weeping is found in this word. The root of this word is vaka. This type of weeping is a type of crying or lamenting that is done understanding why and for what reason we're crying and lamenting. In this case, Abraham was weeping because he had lost Sarah. We understand why we're crying. When we begin to make teshuvah, we understand what it is that has caused us to stray. This causes us to mourn. And what does it say about the mourners? What did Yahshua say about the mourners? Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Right? So, knowing what we are crying about, you can say that Abraham understood that he was weeping for Sarah, as the verse goes. But when we come to the realization that we are indeed weeping in teshuvah because we have lost our spiritual connection and are truly at our farthest from Elohim, let's take a look at the word itself. The last two letters of this word are the tav that represents the farthest point from Elohim. Yes, it represents the vehicle of sacrifice and the covenant that can bring us back. But it also represents the farthest point where we say, we are forsaken, we've been left. But Yahshua said what? Yahweh said what? I will never leave you or forsake you. We come to the realization, no, we haven't been left behind. I've made a mistake, and and now I can make teshuvah. But the last letter is the Hey that represents pay attention. The first time we see the letter Hey in Torah is in the word Chayei, that means behold. But we also see this in Bach Baram, that means they created, or they were created, that Elohim, in the day that he created the earth and the heavens. The little bitty Hey there at Bereshit 2:4 says that it's the breath of his spirit that brought it forth. So it represents the spirit of Yahweh Elohim. So that we have lost our spiritual connection and are truly at the farthest point from Elohim, that we can again be blessed. And there's the Vav. But we remember that Vav, aside from meaning flesh, is also a word that we find it's first in the word Vayet, that means and, it means to attach. And we also find it as a root of a word for the first time in Torah in the word Vav, that means hooks. There were the hooks that connected the curtain of the tabernacle, the veils. It put the whole thing together. So instead of looking at the flesh, now we say that we can again be blessed and reunited to the house of Elohim through his instruction that's found within his heart. And we find there in this word, Veli Vechtocha, that, well, if we spell it, whoops, let's do this right. There. Tocha, that right here we have the word Lev. That means heart. Okay? If we say that the last letter of the Torah in the word Yisrael, the last letter is the Lamed. The first letter in Torah is Beit in Bereshit. That we take the last letter of the Torah and the first letter of the Torah and put them together, it spells heart. It spells heart. But getting kind of ahead of myself, so I'll slow down a little bit. This, however, is an ongoing process, and we must, as we have considered, always be aware of our spiritual health. Does what I've just said make sense? Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That we might be walking along thinking everything's okay, but things really aren't okay, and we have to come to a point where we're examining ourselves on a regular basis. Now, we've just come out of the high holidays and the time before the high holidays, where we have the counting of the Omer, the time between Pesach and Shavuot, where we're saying, okay, where am I really taking a look? And then we come to Rosh Hashanah, and then we have Yom Kippur, that we're really, really taking a look, so that we can be clear by Sukkot. So we've had all this time to reflect. But the thing is that we live in the world. We're fleshly beings. We're human beings. It's what we do. So we always have to be looking at ourselves to see where we're at. Have I strayed? And this is what it's saying, that if I realize that I'm at the farthest point, and I've strayed away from the Spirit of Elohim, that I can make teshuvah and find myself back in the blessings of the house of Elohim through his heart. I go back to the instruction to receive the protection, the nourishment, and the rest that I find in his word. We go back to the letter, or the number 37. Everybody with me? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So, we go now to chapter 25 in our parasha, in verse 1, that kind of starts to give us another direction to go along the same thought process, that says, and Abraham took another wife, and her name was Keturah. The rabbis have come up with this really, really weird interpretation of this, because it says, and Abraham took again a wife, and her name was Keturah. They say that he took again, that he's saying, well, he remarried Hagar, and Hagar had changed her name to Keturah. but okay, there's our Talmud 101 class. What does this mean? So, the word of interest is the word vayosef, that in our verse is translated and another, but the root of this word is yasaf, that means to add, to increase, and more specifically, to do again. To do again. Okay? We add into this phrase the word for and took, which is vayakach, that aside from meaning and took, also means to seize and to lay a hold of. So we have an idea of laying a hold of or seizing something again, and again, and again. How many times do we grab onto the same thing over and over until we finally let it go? It's a question that we can easily begin to formulate out of the first couple of words in this Torah portion. But we read that it was a wife that Abraham took, the word being Isha. Now from our studies we've considered this to represent the spiritual side of our worship, while Ish, meaning male, is the physical side of worship, our prayer, study, and praise. We recognize that it was originally called Adam. Ha-Adam literally means the Adam. Okay? It's a representation of humankind. But this particular the Adam was composed of both Ish and Isha. And they were together when Elohim said, look, from every tree of the garden you may freely eat, including from the tree of life that is in the midst of the garden. But from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, don't eat from it, because the day that you do, you will surely die. And then Elohim says, well, Adam shouldn't be alone. I'm going to make a helper for him. And we all say, oh, this is how he made the woman for the man. What we're literally reading within this is I need to make him a means, I need to help him to communicate with me. It's literally what this whole conversation about making a help meet for him is all about, so that he won't be alone. He's alone because he doesn't have this means of communicating directly with Elohim. So what does he do? He separates Adam into Ish and Isha. And what does Ish say? She will be called Isha because she was taken out of Ish, which tells us that from our praise, from our study, from our prayer comes forth our spirit. And it is our spirit that connects to Elohim through our worship. But what happens when our prayer life or our study life or even our praise life, what praise life? Don't I have to go to church to do that and have a band up there? And you close the door so the neighbors don't see, put the windows down there, and get in your house and you're going all giddy, praising at home. You can praise Elohim. But when our worship life is absent, the spirit life suffers. What happened when Isha was alone? Without prayer and study, what happened? Along comes the serpent that was the most subtle of all the creatures. The Satan uses subtlety to say, that's not what Elohim said. Did he not say you can eat from the trees? She said, well, we can eat from the trees in the garden. What did Elohim say? From all the trees of the garden you may freely eat. She took away from the word. But she said, from the tree that is in the midst of the garden, we shall not eat from it or touch it, or we will die. What tree was in the midst of the garden that Elohim said? The tree of life is the one that's in the midst of the garden. What happens when we don't study? And we are not able to do what Yahshua did when Satan told him, command these stones to be made into bread. And Yahshua said, Scripture says,